The hospital room smelled of stale disinfectant, wilting flowers, and fear. My own fear. I had been swimming in it for weeks. For a 74-year-old woman, the words open heart surgery are a terrifying premonition of the end. But I had survived. I was on the other side, my chest a roadmap of fresh, angry scars hidden beneath a thin hospital gown, my body feeling like a fragile, broken vessel. But I was alive. My son-in-law, Mark, sat in a chair by my bedside, a position he had occupied with a performative devotion for the past week. He was holding my hand, his grip a little too tight, his thumb stroking my skin in a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt proprietary. His face was arranged in a mask of deep, loving sympathy, the kind of look that wins awards. "Sylvia," he began, his voice a smooth, placating purr, the voice he used when he was about to sell something. "You've been so brave. We were all so worried. But you're on the mend now, and we just have to focus on your recovery." He paused, letting the fake sentiment settle in the sterile air. "And while you were recovering, I took the liberty of taking care of a little piece of business for you, to lighten your load, so you wouldn't have to worry about it." May. I watched him, my mind, still fuzzy from the anesthesia, trying to catch up. A cold, slithering dread began to creep up my spine. "The beach house," he said, his voice bright with a terrible, false cheerfulness. "The market is just white hot right now, Sylvia. An opportunity like this might never have come again. So I took care of it. I sold it. We got a fantastic price. The money is already in escrow. Now you have a nice big nest egg and absolutely nothing to worry about ever again." He smiled, a wide, triumphant, and utterly predatory smile. He expected me to be grateful for his foresight, or perhaps too weak, too broken, to argue. He expected tears of relief. He watched me, waiting for my reaction. This man who had married my only daughter, this man who I had trusted with my life, and, far worse, with my power of attorney, while I was under the surgeon's knife. He went pale when I smiled back. It was not a big smile. It was a small, quiet, and deeply tired smile. But it was a real one. And it was not the smile of a victim. It was the smile of a woman who had just watched her opponent, in his arrogance, walk directly into an inescapable, ironclad trap she had set for him 5 years ago. I shifted slightly in the bed, the movement sending a sharp, white-hot pain through my chest. I took a slow, shallow breath, and then I whispered, my voice a dry, reedy thing, but clear as a bell. "Oh, did you, Mar?" I asked. "Did you really? That's proactive of you." I paused, letting him absorb the strangeness of my calm. "Tell me," I continued, my voice still a whisper, "did the new owners happen to read the deed very carefully? Did their lawyer mention the lifetime estate and profit-sharing addendum my husband had me sign and notarize? The part that gives me exclusive lifetime tenancy and 50% of any and all sale profits, regardless of who the titled owner is. Or was that a detail you forgot to mention when you were cashing in on my near-death experience?" Nakom. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Sylvia. I'm 74 years old. And while I was on an operating table with my chest literally cracked open, my daughter's husband was busy selling my beloved home out from under me. He thought he was pulling off the perfect crime. He had no idea he was just the final foolish player in a game my late husband, David, had already won. The secret I am sharing with you today is a story of a husband's incredible foresight. It is the story of a secret, legal fortress my husband built around me before he died. A fortress designed to protect me from the one person he never fully trusted. My ambitious, charming, and endlessly greedy son-in-law. For 5 years, I have lived with the knowledge of this legal trap, this secret clause in the deed to my own home. I prayed I would never have to use it. I hoped that Mark would prove my husband wrong, that he would become the man my daughter believed him to be. But my husband, as he so often was right. And the moment Mark asked me to sign over power of attorney before my surgery, his eyes shining with a little too much concern, I knew this day was coming. This isn't just a story about a house. It's the story of a husband's final act of love from beyond the grave. and the moment a greedy son-in-law realized he had been checkmated by a dead man. So please, get comfortable. This is a story about a betrayal at the most vulnerable moment imaginable, and the quiet, satisfying click of a well-laid trap finally springing shut. Your support, your likes and subscriptions to Silent Grandma are a comfort to me as I embark on this, my final and most important act of recovery. To understand why a man would sell his own mother-in-law's home while she was fighting for her life on an operating table, you have to understand what that house was. It was not just a piece of real estate. It was a sanctuary. It was a kingdom by the sea. It was the living, breathing heart of our family and the masterpiece of the man I loved. My husband, David, was a boat builder, a master craftsman. He was a man who believed in things that were solid, things that were real, things that were built to last. He spent his life working with his hands, his skin perpetually smelling of sawdust and salt water. We weren't wealthy people. We were working people. But we had a dream, a shared dream of a small, simple house by the sea. For 30 years we saved. We lived in a small, modest house in the city. We drove old, reliable cars. We didn't take fancy vacations. Every extra penny we had went into the beach house fund. It was a dream we were building together, one saved dollar at a time. When we were finally in our late 50s, we found it. A small, dilapidated, forgotten little cottage on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was a wreck. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, and the garden was a jungle of weeds. But the view was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The sound of the waves, the smell of the salt in the air, the sight of the sun setting over the endless expanse of water. It was a slice of heaven. We bought it for a song, and we spent the next 2 years rebuilding it with our own 2 hands. David, my brilliant craftsman, rebuilt the house from the studs out. He laid the hardwood floors. He built the beautiful stone fireplace. He crafted the wide, welcoming porch that would become the center of our lives. I, in turn, built the garden. I spent thousands of hours on my hands and knees, amending the sandy soil, planting seagrass and hydrangeas and stubborn, fragrant climbing roses that eventually covered the entire cottage in a riot of color. That house was not just a building. It was a physical manifestation of our love, our patience, our shared hard work. It was our sanctuary. It was where we raised our daughter, Sarah, during the long, sun-drenched summers of her childhood. It was where she learned to swim, where she had her first kiss, where she came home, heartbroken, from her first year of college. The walls of that house were soaked in our memories. Sarah was a wonderful daughter, a gentle, artistic soul. She had my love of the garden and her father's kind, steady heart. She became a painter, her canvases filled with the light and the colors of the sea she had grown up with. She was a dreamer, a romantic, a woman who, like her father, saw the world in terms of beauty and truth, not profit and loss. Which is why, I suppose, she was so utterly, completely, and blindly susceptible to the charms of a man like Mark. She met him at one of her art shows. He was everything she, and we, were not. He was a slick, fast-talking, and relentlessly ambitious salesman who worked in commercial real estate. He was a man who saw the world not as a thing of beauty, but as a collection of assets to be leveraged. He was charming. He was handsome. And he swept my gentle, artistic daughter off her feet. David never liked him. He never trusted him. He saw the hunger in Mark's eyes, the restlessness, the deep, desperate need to project an image of success that was not yet his own. "He's a shortcut man, Sylvia," David would say to me late at night after Mark had spent the entire evening talking about his latest, can't-miss investment scheme. "He doesn't want to build a boat. He wants to be seen at the helm of a yacht he didn't pay for." But Sarah loved him, and so we accepted him. We welcomed him into our family, into our home, into our sanctuary by the sea. He professed to love it. He would sit on our porch, a gin and tonic in his hand, and he would talk about how restorative it was, how it was a haven from the cutthroat world of his business dealings. He did not see the love and the labor that had gone into every single floorboard, every single rosebush. He saw a prime piece of oceanfront property. The first sign of his true nature came about 5 years ago. It was during the last year of David's life, when the cancer had already begun its slow, relentless march. For tax purposes, and on the advice of our lawyer, we had decided to transfer the ownership of the beach house to our daughter, Sarah Tutt. It was a legal maneuver, a way to ensure she would inherit the house without a massive tax burden. But David was worried. He trusted our daughter implicitly, but he did not trust the man she had married. "I want to add a clause, Sylvia," he had said to me one evening, his voice weak, but his mind as sharp as ever. "A lifetime estate addendum. It will give you the absolute right to live in the house for the rest of your life, no matter who holds the title. And it will give you 50% of any profit if the house is ever sold. It's a fail-safe, a way to protect you, a way to make sure that Mark can never, ever kick you out of your own home." At the time, I had thought he was being overly cautious, almost paranoid. But I had trusted my husband. We had gone to our lawyer's office, and he had drawn up the addendum. I had signed it. It had been notarized and attached to the official deed. It was an ironclad, legal, and utterly secret shield that my husband had built around me. And then, I had put it out of my mind. After David passed, Mark's loving concern for me intensified. He and Sarah were constantly at my side. And then, my own health began to fail. I was diagnosed with a serious heart condition that required immediate and very dangerous surgery. The day before I was scheduled to go into the hospital, Mark and Sarah sat me down in my living room. Their faces were masks of grave, loving concern. "Sylvia," Mark began, his voice a soft, gentle purr. "We need to talk about something. It's just a formality, a precaution. But with this surgery, we need to be prepared for any eventuality." He explained that while I was in surgery and during my recovery, the bills would still need to be paid. The house would still need to be managed. "So," he said, pulling a document from his briefcase, "our lawyer drew this up. It's a temporary power of attorney. It just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs while you're unable to. Just to pay the bills, to talk to the insurance company, just to make sure you're protected. It's the sensible thing to do." I looked at my daughter. Her face was full of a genuine, tearful fear for my health. She trusted her husband completely. And I, in my own fear, in my own vulnerability, in my own desire to believe in the goodness of the man my daughter loved, I signed the paper. I handed him the keys to my kingdom. I had no idea he was planning to sell it, and me, for scrap. The week leading up to my surgery was a blur of fear, doctor's appointments, and my son-in-law's suffocating, ever-present concern. Mark was a whirlwind of manufactured efficiency. He took over everything. He scheduled my pre-op appointments. He spoke to the surgeons, his voice full of intelligent, probing questions that were designed to impress. He organized a meal train with my friends, a gesture of such loving, community-minded support that it brought tears to their eyes. He was playing the part of the perfect devoted son-in-law, and he was playing it for an audience. My daughter, Sarah, was a wreck. She was so consumed by her fear for my life that she was blind to her husband's machinations. She saw his flurry of activity not as a power grab, but as a manifestation of his love. "Isn't he wonderful, Mom?" she would say to me, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I don't know what we would do without him. And I, not wanting to add to her burden, would just smile and agree. I did not have the heart to tell her that her wonderful husband was a vulture, circling, waiting for me to die. The day I signed the power of attorney was the day I truly understood the depth of my husband's foresight. Mark had presented it to me as a simple necessity, a piece of administrative paperwork. But as I held the pen in my trembling hand, I looked into his eyes, and I saw it. A flicker of something cold, hard, and deeply avaricious. It was a look of triumph, barely concealed beneath a mask of loving concern. And in that moment, I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and as sharp as the surgeon's scalpel, that my husband had been right. This was not a precaution. It was a weapon, and he intended to use it. I spent the night before my surgery alone in my beach house. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, the books, the photographs. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and I listened to the sound of the waves, the same sound that had been the soundtrack to my life for 30 years. I was saying goodbye. I did not know if I would survive the surgery, but I knew that if I did, the life I had known, the family I had loved, would be gone forever. The surgery was a brutal 8-hour ordeal. I was a ship, battered and broken in a terrible storm. But I did not sink. I woke up in the intensive care unit, a tangle of tubes and wires and beeping machines, my body a landscape of pain. But I was alive. Mark and Sarah were there, of course. Sarah's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated relief. She was weeping, holding my hand, her love a warm, comforting presence in the cold, sterile room. Mark's face was also a mask, but it was a different kind of mask. It was a mask of solemn, concerned victory. He had the look of a man who had just won a great and very profitable victory. The first few days were a blur of pain, medication, and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I was too weak to talk, too weak to think. I just drifted in and out of a fog of sleep and pain. And in that fog, Mark began his work. He was constantly on his phone, his voice a low, urgent murmur. I would catch snippets of his conversations. Words like escrow, closing date, AS is condition. I was too groggy, too disoriented to piece them together. I thought he was dealing with his own real estate business. I had no idea he was selling my home. He would talk to me in a soothing, condescending tone, the tone one uses with a senile and very wealthy aunt. "Don't you worry about a thing, Sylvia," he would say, patting my hand. "I'm taking care of everything. You just focus on getting better." He intercepted my friends' calls. He managed my visitors. He became the gatekeeper of my life. He was isolating me, cutting me off from the outside world, creating a narrative for my friends and neighbors that I was far more ill, far more confused than I actually was. He was laying the groundwork for his great betrayal, creating a world in which a frail, post-operative old woman would be in no position to challenge the sensible, loving decisions of her devoted son-in-law. The first time I realized what was happening was a week after my surgery. I was feeling a little stronger. The fog in my mind was beginning to lift. A nurse came in to change my IV drip. She was a kind, chatty woman named Maria. "Your son-in-law is such a wonderful man," she said, her voice full of a genuine admiration. "He's been here every single day and managing the sale of your house at the same time. I don't know how he does it." The words hit me like a physical blow. The sale of my house. It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. "The sale of my house," I whispered, my voice a dry, rasping thing. Maria's face fell. She realized she had said something she shouldn't have. "Oh, I'm sorry," she stammered. "I just assumed you knew." He was on the phone with the realtor in the hallway just now. He said the closing was next week. The closing was next week. While I was lying here, my heart held together with stitches and staples, he was closing the deal on my life. The cold, hard reality of it was a slap in the face. The grief, the fear, the post-operative confusion, they all burned away, replaced by a single, cold, and utterly lucid thought. "Kay's going to get away with this. Is he? But then I remembered. I remembered my husband's words. I remembered the secret clause. I remembered the ironclad, legal fortress he had built around me. And I realized, with a slow dawning and deeply satisfying clarity, that Mark was not going to get away with this. He was not a brilliant criminal. He was a fool. A greedy, arrogant, and breathtakingly stupid fool. And he was about to learn a very, very expensive lesson. From that moment on, my recovery had a new purpose. I was no longer just a patient, trying to heal my broken body. I was a warrior, preparing for battle. I did everything the doctors told me to do. I did my breathing exercises. I took my medication. I walked the sterile, linoleum hallways of the hospital, each step a painful, but determined, march towards the final confrontation. I did not let on that I knew. I played the part of the frail, confused, and grateful old woman. I would smile my weak, watery smile when Mark would tell me about the wonderful price he had gotten for the house. I would nod my head in feeble agreement when he would talk about the sensible investments he was going to make with my money. I was lulling him into a state of absolute, arrogant, and utterly false security. I was letting him build his own gallows. And I was waiting, with a patience I had learned over a lifetime, for the perfect moment to hand him the rope. The day of the confrontation was 2 weeks after my surgery. I was scheduled to be discharged the following morning. I was sitting up in the chair by the window, dressed in my own clothes for the first time, a simple, elegant silk robe. I had even put on a little lipstick. I wanted to look like myself again. I wanted to look like a woman he should not have underestimated. Mark arrived in the early afternoon, carrying a ridiculously large bouquet of flowers and a box of expensive chocolates. He was in his victory lap. He was here to deliver the final triumphant news and to escort his frail, grateful, and now conveniently wealthy mother-in-law into the next, managed phase of her life. He sat in the chair opposite me, his knees almost touching mine. He leaned forward, his face a mask of practiced, earnest sincerity. It was the face he used to close a deal. "Sylvia," he began, his voice a smooth, placating purr. "You look wonderful, so much stronger. The doctors are amazed at your recovery." I smiled, a small, tired smile. "I'm a tough old bird, Mark," I said, my voice still a little weak. "You certainly are," he said, his smile widening. He reached out and took my hand, his grip a little too tight. "And because you've been so brave, so focused on your recovery, I've taken care of everything for you. I didn't want you to have to worry about a single thing." He paused, letting the weight of his supposed generosity settle in the sterile air. "And I have some wonderful news, truly wonderful. It's about the beach house." "Oh, no," I said, my voice a soft, interested whisper. "The market is just white hot right now, Sylvia," he said, his voice bright with a terrible false cheerfulness. "An opportunity like this might never have come again. A cash buyer, no contingencies, a 30-day close. It was a perfect storm. So I took care of it. I sold it." He leaned back in his chair, a triumphant, magnanimous king, bestowing a great gift upon a humble subject. "We got a fantastic price, far more than we ever expected. The money is already in escrow. It's all taken care of. Now you have a nice big nest egg and absolutely nothing to worry about ever again." He smiled, a wide predatory smile. He expected me to be grateful. He expected tears of relief. He expected me to be overwhelmed by his business acumen, his loving foresight, his brilliant management of my affairs. He watched me, waiting for my reaction, this man who had sold my heart, my history, my sanctuary, while I was lying, unconscious, on an operating table. He went pale when I smiled back. It was not a big smile. It was a small, quiet, and deeply tired smile. But it was a real one. And it was not the smile of a victim. It was the smile of a woman who had just watched her opponent, in his breathtaking arrogance, walk directly into an inescapable ironclad trap she had set for him 5 years ago. I shifted slightly in the chair, the movement sending a sharp, white-hot pain through my chest. I took a slow, shallow breath, and then I whispered, my voice a dry, reedy thing, but clear as a bell. "Oh, did you, Mark?" I asked. "Did you really? That's proactive of you." I paused, letting him absorb the strangeness of my calm, the confusion that was just beginning to flicker in his confident eyes. "Tell me," I continued, my voice still a whisper, but a whisper that was suddenly as sharp and as cold as a shard of ice. Did the new owners happen to read the deed very carefully? Did their lawyer do a proper title search? Mark's smile faltered. A look of wary confusion replaced his triumphant confidence. What are you talking about, Sylvia? Of course they did. It was a perfectly clean, straightforward sale. Dani, Edium, Giovs. Was it? I asked, my voice gaining a little strength, because I seemed to recall a small, but rather significant, addendum to that deed. An addendum my husband, David, a man who was, as you know, a master craftsman, who believed in building things to last, had me sign and notarize about 5 years ago, just before he transferred the title to our daughter. I watched the color begin to drain from his face. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, the confident salesman suddenly at a loss for words. I believe, I said, my voice now as steady and as strong as my husband's handcrafted oak table. It was called the Lifetime Estate and Profit-Sharing Addendum. A rather brilliant piece of legal craftsmanship, don't you think? It gives me, Sylvia Miller, the exclusive and absolute right to live in that house for the rest of my natural life, regardless of who the titled owner is. It's a failsafe. You see a way to make sure that no... I let the words hang in the air, a quiet, devastating indictment. Mark was no longer pale. He was ashen. He looked like a man who had just been told that the winning lottery ticket he was holding was a forgery. But that's not all, I said, my voice now full of a cold, quiet, and deeply satisfying fury. There's the profit-sharing part of the addendum. It states in clear, legally binding language that in the event of a sale, 50% of any and all net profits from that sale are to be paid directly to me. 50%, Mark.all. Regardless of who the titled owner is. Regardless of who signed the sale documents, under a temporary power of attorney they acquired, while the beneficiary was unconscious and fighting for her life. I leaned forward, my own eyes now as hard and as cold as his had been just moments before. So tell me, Mark, did you happen to mention that little detail to the new owners? Did you happen to mention it to your lawyer? Did you happen to factor in the fact that half of that nice big nest egg you were so proud of is, in fact, legally and irrevocably mine? Or was that a detail you forgot to mention when you were so busy cashing in on my near-death experience? The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a chessboard after the final, devastating, and completely unexpected checkmate. Mark could not speak. He just stared at me, his face a mask of utter, abject, and soul-crushing horror. The brilliant real estate mogul, the master of the deal, the man who had so cleverly and so ruthlessly outmaneuvered a frail old woman, had just realized that he had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and utterly, completely, and publicly destroyed by a dead man, and by the tough old bird who had, it turned out, been paying very, very close attention. Mark did not speak. He just stared at me, his face a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief. The smooth, confident salesman, the man who had always had an answer for everything, was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out shell, a man who had just watched his entire world, a world built on a foundation of lies and arrogance, get vaporized by a single, quiet, and perfectly executed legal truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. A small, strange, guttural sound escaped his throat, the sound of a man who has just been punched in the soul. He slumped back in his chair, his body seeming to shrink, to collapse in on itself. He looked in that moment like a small, lost, and terrified boy. And in that moment, I did not feel triumph. I did not feel anger. I felt only a profound and deeply, deeply weary sense of pity. Pity for this man, my daughter's husband, who had allowed his greed to so utterly eclipse his humanity. And pity for my daughter, my sweet, gentle Sarah, who had no idea that her entire life was about to be consumed by the fallout of her husband's monstrous and breathtakingly stupid betrayal. The door to the hospital room opened, and Sarah walked in. She was carrying a vase of fresh flowers and a bright, cheerful smile. She had come to check on her recovering mother and her devoted, caretaking husband. She walked into a room that was no longer a recovery room, but a tomb. "Hi, Mom," she began, her voice full of a genuine, loving warmth that was now a dagger in my heart. "I brought you some fresh dahlias. Oh, Mark, you're here? I thought you had a—" Her voice trailed off as she finally registered the atmosphere in the room. The dead, thick, and terrible silence. She looked from my calm, stony face to her husband's ashen, crumbling one. "What is it?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a dawning fear. "What's happened?" Mark could not speak. He just continued to stare at me, his eyes full of a new, and even more terrifying, emotion. The pleading terror of a condemned man looking at his executioner. And so it fell to me. I had to be the one to tell my own daughter that the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with, was a common thief who had tried to steal her own mother's home while she was on an operating table. "Sarah, sweetheart," I began, my voice quiet, gentle, but unyielding. "Your husband has just informed me that he has sold our beach house." I watched as a wave of confusion washed over her face. "Sold the house? But why? I thought we were going to spend the summer there after you recovered." "He thought it was a good time to sell," I said, my gaze never leaving Mark's face. "He thought he could get a good price. And he did. He did it all for us, you see. For our future, for our security. He did it without telling either of us, of course, because he was protecting us from the stress." The sarcasm in my voice was a thin, sharp, and very cold razor blade. And Sarah, my gentle, but not stupid daughter, felt its edge. She looked at her husband, her face now a mask of dawning horror. "Mark," she whispered, "what have you done?" And that, finally, is what broke him. The sound of his wife's voice, the sound of the one person in the world he had supposedly been doing all of this for, finally understanding the depth of his betrayal. He let out a low, ragged sob, and he buried his face in his hands. The story came out then, in a torrent of my own cold, quiet, and precise words, and his broken, pathetic, and self-serving sobs. I told her everything. About the power of attorney, about the secret sale, and I told her about her father's addendum, the ironclad legal fortress that had just saved my life and destroyed hers. I watched her as she listened. I watched her face go from confusion to disbelief, to a pale, sickening, and absolute comprehension. She was a woman watching her entire life burn to the ground. The handsome, successful husband. The beautiful life. The secure future. All of it, a lie, a sham, a house of cards built on the foundation of his greed and her own willful blindness. When I was finished, she did not scream. She did not cry. She just stood there, in the center of the cold, sterile hospital room, and she looked at her husband, at the weeping, pathetic shell of a man who had just destroyed her world. "I think," she said, her voice a dead, hollow whisper, "I had never heard before, that you should leave now, Mark." And he did. He stood up, a broken, shuffling old man, and he walked out of the room, out of the hospital, and out of our lives. The aftermath was a quiet, legal, and deeply painful demolition. I did not call the police. I did not have Mark charged with fraud. To do so would have been to drag my daughter and my grandchildren through a public, humiliating ordeal. My husband had not built a weapon for me to destroy my family. He had built a shield for me to protect myself. And now, I used it. My lawyer, a quiet, sensible man who had known my husband for 40 years, sent a single, simple letter to Mark's lawyer. It laid out the terms. It was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. The sale of the beach house, which Mark had so proudly executed, had to be unwound. This, it turned out, was a legal and financial nightmare. The new owners, a wealthy couple from California, were, quite rightly, furious. They had bought a house in good faith, and now they were being told that the sale was invalid. They threatened to sue everyone. They threatened to sue Mark for fraud. They threatened to sue the real estate agents. They threatened to sue the title company. Mark was ruined. The deposit from the sale, which he had already mentally spent 100 times over, was frozen in escrow. He was facing multiple lawsuits, any one of which would bankrupt him and destroy what was left of his professional reputation. He was a man in a legal and financial freefall, with no safety net to catch him. And then, I made my move. I had my lawyer contact his lawyer. I made him an offer. I would, through a private trust, provide the funds to settle with the wronged buyers, to make them whole, to make the entire, ugly mess go away. I would, in essence, bail him out of the catastrophic failure he had created. But my offer came with a condition. A single, simple, and non-negotiable condition. He had to sign over his half of the ownership of his own primary residence, the house he shared with my daughter, Sarah, to me. He had to put his own home in my name. The house I had helped them buy years ago, the house where they were raising my grandchildren. It was a brutal and deeply, deeply ironic move. He had tried to steal my house, so I, in return, would take his. He had no choice. It was either that or complete and utter financial and professional ruin. He signed the papers, and just like that, I became the sole owner of my daughter's home. I became her landlord. My relationship with my daughter in months that followed was a quiet, painful, and deeply complicated dance. She was a woman adrift, her heart broken, her life in ruins. She was living in a house that was no longer hers, with a man she no longer knew. She was filled with a toxic cocktail of shame, of anger at her husband, and a quiet, resentful fury at me, the mother who had, in her eyes, so ruthlessly and so completely destroyed her world. We did not talk about what had happened. The wound was too raw, too deep. We just existed. I would visit my grandchildren, and she would be there, a polite, distant, and deeply sad ghost in her own kitchen. We would talk about the weather. We would talk about the grandchildren's school projects. We would talk about everything, and we would talk about nothing. The turning point, the first, fragile thaw in our long, cold winter, came on a rainy Saturday afternoon in the fall. I was at their house, helping my granddaughter, Chloe, with a school project. Sarah was in the kitchen, silently, miserably, washing dishes. I looked out the window at the rain lashing against the glass. "It's a good day to be inside," I said, my voice quiet. "It reminds me of the storms we used to get at the beach house. Do you remember?" She stopped washing the dishes. Her back was to me, but I saw her shoulders stiffen. "I remember," she whispered, her voice a barely audible thread of sound. "I remember you, as a little girl," I continued, my own voice now thick with a memory so vivid it was almost a physical pain. "You were so afraid of the thunder, you would come into my bed, and you would hide your head under the covers, and your father and I would tell you stories until you fell asleep. We told you that the house was strong, that it was built by your father's own hands, and that no storm, no matter how fierce, could ever touch you there. We told you it was your safe harbor." I let the words hang in the air. The silence in the room was profound. And then, I heard it. A single, small, choked sob. She turned around, her face wet with tears, her eyes full of a pain so deep it mirrored my own. "He sold our safe harbor, Mom," she whispered. "He sold it." It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was a confession that she finally understood what she had lost. Not a piece of real estate, not an asset, but a sanctuary, a home, a place built of love. "Yes, he did, sweetheart," I said, my own tears now falling freely. "He did." I stood up, and I walked over to her, and I wrapped my arms around my daughter, my sad, broken, and finally, seeing daughter. And we just stood there, in the middle of the kitchen of the house that was now mine, and we wept. We wept for the house we had lost, for the man we had lost, for the trust we had lost. We wept for the ruins of the beautiful life we had once had. And in those shared, salty, and deeply healing tears, a new, fragile, and desperately needed foundation was laid. So what is the final lesson from my long and painful convalescence? It is that a family is not a business. It is a fragile, living, and often messy ecosystem. And it cannot be managed with spreadsheets and power plays. It can only be nurtured with love, with trust, and with a deep, and often difficult, respect for the past. My son-in-law, in his desperate modern hunger for success, had forgotten that. He saw my home not as a sacred space of memory and love, but as an underperforming asset. And in his attempt to liquidate it, he liquidated his own life, his own marriage, and his own soul. I also learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is to build a fortress. My husband, in his quiet wisdom, knew that the world was full of men like Mark. Men who were dazzled by the shiny, the new, the profitable. Men who had no respect for the old, the sturdy, the things that were built to last. And so he built me a fortress of legal protection, a shield to protect me from the very world he knew his own daughter was choosing to embrace. He did not do it to punish her. He did it to protect me. And in doing so, he gave me the power to, in the end, save her from herself. My life is different now. I did not move back to the beach house. The memories were too painful. I sold it, and the substantial profits from the sale, both my half and the half I had legally reclaimed from Mark, have been placed in a trust for my grandchildren, Chloe and Josh. A trust that their father will never be able to touch. My daughter, Sarah, and Mark are no longer together. The revelation of his betrayal was a blow from which their marriage could not recover. She is a single mother now, living a life that is far less glamorous, but far more honest than the one she had before. She is a painter again. She paints the sea. She paints the light. She is, for the first time in a long time, building something of her own. Our relationship is a work in progress. It is a quiet, careful, and often difficult thing. But it is real. We are two women, a mother and a daughter, who are trying to find our way back to each other through the wreckage of a man's ambition. And me. I live in a small, sunny apartment in the city. I am surrounded by my books, my art, and a few precious pieces of furniture I saved from the beach house, including my husband's favorite, worn-out armchair. I am not a queen in a castle by the sea. I am just a grandmother in a small apartment with a quiet life. But it is a life that is entirely my own. A life that is safe. A life that is, finally, at peace. Thank you for joining me on this journey. It has been a story of great loss, but also of a surprising and deeply profound victory. Your support has been a constant source of strength. If my story has moved you, or given you the courage to read the fine print in your own life, a like or a subscription to Excellent Grandma would be a profound honor. Remember that the strongest fortresses are not built of stone, but of love, of wisdom, and of a quiet, unshakable dignity. Protect your sanctuary, and never, ever underestimate the power of a well-written addendum. Be well and be wise. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Sylvia.